Two things. One, how are you? How have you been?
I'm good, man. I'm good. We're managing. It's this is crazy. It's a crazy world we're living in right now, but we're good. How about you?
I'm doing okay. I want to hear more about you. I want to hear. I want to like even comparison. I want to know what the mood like is down there.
Yeah, it's it's actually fairly positive.
Okay,
We,
good.
we've had I had a staff member at the building that I'm currently working at um, test positive for COVID-19. Um, in fact, I was in a meeting with her yesterday. She's still wearing oxygen, so
Wow.
she's home from the hospital and everything. But I mean, um, uh, I've had several folk that I know through my church network who have been near death
Get
and
out of here.
um, are back at home, and so I'm grateful for that.
Absolutely.
And we've been in prayer about that whole situation. So um, yeah, I mean, it's I think I have not been able to ignore the seriousness of it, but at the same time, I thoroughly enjoyed the family time at home.
Mm,
We've all been healthy and safe, and played hide and seek in the dark, Tuesday night with my kids, and
I
um,
love it, man.
yeah.
Do
So
you mind? I'm gonna. Can I hit live just so everyone knows we're out there? It like
yeah,
I don't even know who's gonna tune in. Schedules are all thrown off, but just like I say, just in case there's questions out there. But I want
yeah,
to,
absolutely.
especially when we talk about when we publish it, we'll see. You know, okay, here it goes. I think we should be good. The I think you bring up a really interesting point, and it might even be a common one at this point. I think at first there was a ton of fear. Now I hope that we've had enough time, sort of in this strange moment, that people are having the opportunity to gain a little bit of perspective. And the world is strange. This moment in time is strange. But if you look at it as sort of a gift of time,
Right.
then with that perspective, man, like you said, just to play hide and go seek with your kids. How often? And this is a direct question to you, but I just had my sister. I was talking to my sister yesterday who has a new child. How often do you want to do those things, but you like quote like just don't have the time, And now we've been
Right.
given this
Right.
amount of time, and we can do them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you know, I think as young parents, I'm in the first, third of my career, I guess, you can say,
Mm,
and so definitely still doing a lot of building right now, willing to make, sacrifices in order to try to build up to where we're trying to go. Um, but this has certainly, I think, even put things in perspective and just say, like, dude, your kids are only young once. And
yeah,
and one of the things that I've really thought about, and I had posted it on Facebook. I had seen somebody else post it a while ago. And one of the things I've really thought about is this idea that, like, when my children look back on the quarantine,
yeah,
coronavirus, they're gonna say, "Oh, that's the time where mom and daddy were home all the time.
yeah,
Yeah, we had to do a little e-learning, but they were home with us. They helped us with our learning, and then we played. We played
yeah.
basketball with them. We've played capture the flag. We've read books together. We've watched movies together, um, and so I think they'll really view it as this time that was a little bit more positive, because I don't know that
Sure.
they understand the the um, the levity of the situation. So
I wonder. I want to touch on that for a little bit before we go any further. I've learned that I just I get so wrapped up in the person that I forget to give a shout out to the coffee places until the end. So, coffee with a coach. We got to give shout outs to our spots. So this morning I decided to drink Innkeeper's coffee. Do you remember Innkeeper's down in Galesburg?
yes,
I've got a theme going here. You might have noticed my T-shirt already.
yes,
Prairie Fire. Knox
Right.
College baseball. And then I've got Innkeeper's Coffee. I was down there. We were down there not too long ago for an event, and I brought home a bunch of beans from Innkeeper's, and it's
Got it.
fantastic. So, what's your
Excellent.
local spot?
So in return, I'm not normally a coffee person. So I'm actually this morning, this is not locally made. It is locally purchased.
Okay.
Fruit punch kickstart. But
Can I, with all due respect, gross, but continue. Yes.
I knew that you and your nutrition side of you was going to say, Maurice, what are you doing, man? It's 9:17 in the morning. You are drinking 19 total grams of sugar. That's not bad.
Not as bad as I thought. It's not
Right,
as bad
right.
as I thought.
See?
Yeah.
But my local place I go to is Barb City Bagel.
Okay.
And they have been the spot since I was in high school. I used to be late to school so I could go there and get their bagel knots or bagel bites. They've got this cream cheese frosting that is to die for. And then they've also got some delicious coffee drinks that I've forced myself into as an adult now who has to get up early in the morning and do stuff like that.
I feel like if you don't have a little coffee breath in your first meeting, then you're not a true professional. I don't mean that. That's not true. But okay, so you tell me. So Barb's that's the DeKalb mascot. I know. What's the relevance of Barb's in DeKalb?
Yeah, so great question. Joseph Glidden, Elwood, Haish, these are all guys who were responsible for creating barbed wire. And so they made their fortune making different patents on barbed wire. They all lived here in town. Barbed wire really kind of put an end to the open cattle drive because people began to fence off their land with barbed wire and keep their animals inside. And so it was really part of the late 1860s revolution that kind of changed some of those things. And so we still have what's called the Elwood House here, which is this giant mansion. We have the Glidden Homestead, which is where he actually the shop that he made the barbed wire in and would send it off. So that's where you get the barbs from.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So little bit of American history that comes from right here in DeKalb, Illinois.
I love it, man. All right, and then I want to dig into the story that we were talking about right before we went on Instagram Live. No names or whatever you feel comfortable with, but you said you know some people who've been sick. So I'm really interested in this. I want to hear about those stories. I want to hear about what's an important element of your story, which is those people are now sort of being reincorporated back into regular life, which is hopefully where we're going. Well, why don't we start there? Because I have some other sort of tangents that I won't go on quite yet.
Yeah, so there was a guy, and I'll share his name just because he's been all over. He was in the Chicago Tribune and has been all over the Aurora paper, a youth pastor that's part of the United Pentecostal Church, which is my church organization internationally and here locally. So part of the United Pentecostal Church, Illinois district, he's in Aurora, and had heard that we were shutting things down, so he went up to visit family. He's originally from Michigan, so he was there and wound up in a hospital. And I'm telling you, not more than a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, his wife sent out a Facebook post just requesting urgent prayer because he had taken a turn for the worse. And so, I saw, people across the country, really joining in and praying for this young man. He's a few years younger than me in his late 20s. And thanks be to God, he is back at home and recovering.
So how old then? A few years younger than you?
Yeah, I think he's I've heard a couple different numbers, either 27 or 29.
So, but young.
Yeah, young,
Yeah.
absolutely. And so, again, a child at home, been married a few years. He got on and he posted on Facebook and just thanked people for that prayer, and thanked people, his family for being there, and thanked his wife for just, being by his side as much as she could.
Mm-hmm.
One of the difficult things with a lot of this now is that isolation piece.
Mm.
That idea that when you have coronavirus, they're not letting anybody into those rooms.
Dude,
And
those
so,
stories are sad.
yeah, because part of recovery, there is a psychological piece to recovery. There is
There's no doubt.
a sunshine and smiles of loved ones that helps me to, they're like biologically has an impact on my recovery.
No doubt.
And so when I just got my nurses and doctors, those become the people that you really lean on. And so,
Yeah.
his situation and one other were really bad. My one of the staff members at my elementary building, her situation, she was hospitalized. I do not believe she ever ended up on a ventilator. So hers was a little bit more easy to handle, but just like I said, she was on oxygen still yesterday and has been home from the hospital for almost a week.
So I don't put either one of these people on the spot, but so I'll just throw this out more, I guess, rhetorically. I'm really interested in how this thing moves and spreads. After that, this thing being the virus, I'm really interested in what certain pre-existing conditions might be that bring it to that level, because we hear these stories that some of them are freaking terrifying.
Right.
Some of them, but then
Right.
there are also stories where it's like it's kind of like having a cold.
Right.
In what range? Which also, it's funny. One of the things that to me is most interesting about this disease at this moment in time is the level of uncertainty. It'd be one thing if it was like, and I think that's where some people, where some of like where this gets mistaken for politics. I think it's a mistake to add politics to this thing. Although there's a line of thought there, but I think it should be separate from politics. I think it should be all about people. I think it should be about public health. That's where I stand. But I think where people have trouble is the level of uncertainty. Some people, and it's just human nature to go to one end or the other. Some people are seeing this pandemic and saying it's like just wildly tragic, assuming that every case is this ventilator necessary, really terrible case. The other people are saying, look, if it's like a cold, why are we shutting down businesses? And some people are asymptomatic, so why is this a big deal? It is just, and we're going to go back eventually, but when? And that keeps getting pushed and all that stuff. So it's this strange degree of uncertainty.
Right.
What do the symptoms look like? When are we going back to work and school? That has made this such an interesting time, I'd say.
Well, and I think the uncertainty actually is part of that answer, right? Part of the answer is if I can have this and be asymptomatic and go and spread it to 10 people.
That's right.
And one of those 10 people has a pre-existing condition and becomes very symptomatic, that uncertainty is actually part of why we are needing to continue
There's no doubt
in some of these efforts. And so I'll take it to another place though, that the news really kind of hopped on last week and early this week, and that has been this discussion of the impact on the African American community, where African Americans, who are making up 30% of the population in some of these major cities, are making up 70% of the deaths. And so when we talk about those pre-existing conditions and some of the impacts of that, now everybody that I have known personally who has contracted coronavirus has been white, with varying levels of kind of health. So where there has been some some weight, and I don't want to say weight issues, but just not necessarily sitting within that what the doctors would define as
I
a
hear you.
healthy weight.
I love the way
Because I love these people, man. I love these people that I'm talking about, and I'm not trying to be offensive, but I do know that is one of the underlying conditions that can impact some of that.
You know what's interesting? Just to kind of relieve you of that burden, I'll say a public health fact, and then you take it wherever you want to go. I will say that just from a public health standpoint, public health at its core should be altruistic, meaning we want the greatest number of people to survive, regardless of demographic, regardless of whatever. But it can also identify these pre-existing conditions that would complicate a variable. If the virus is the variable, then obesity, diabetes, poor health, these would be real complicating factors. So if someone were to fall in one of those categories, that doesn't say they could still be an incredible human being,
right?
But they'd be at a greater risk.
Absolutely. So to that point, the youth pastor that I was talking about, I don't know that he has had any pre-existing health conditions.
Yeah.
So there's a situation where you're talking about somebody in their mid to late 20s who still really struggled with this. But I think that what this has done is it has pointed out that some of these pre-existing health conditions are running rampant in the African American community.
Yeah.
And I personally, I know and understand the how do I want to say this? I understand the historical, socioeconomic impact of living in the inner city. That's not my personal experience. I grew up here in DeKalb, but I've got family in the inner city. I know what that means. I know what that looks like. I know some of the health concerns then that come from that.
Yep.
And really, you could expand that to poverty in general, right? And some of the health concerns, some of the lack of access to medical facilities, and some of those various things that I think really have that impact. And I think that's why you're seeing then that 70%. So
I agree.
How do we? I think that's one of the things that this has done, and in a lot of ways, and I come at it from a school perspective too, is that this coronavirus has really pulled the cover off some inequities that definitely exist in our society.
There's no doubt, and I think you're touching on a topic that is it's sort of like as we envision the next stage of the Good Athlete Project, that's it. Okay, and I'm almost getting choked up thinking about it. I'm telling you, because it's so vital. I think it is we have some friends and partners and kids that we really, really care about in areas that are, they're at a greater risk. They're in the 70%. And it hurts me to think about because there are deep on a timeline, long-lasting, deep-seated reasons for it. You could trace back why some of this is happening.
Right.
And that's a necessary discussion. It's not one I think I'm uniquely positioned to have. So I acknowledge it, but that's not my area of expertise. What I do see is the people here and now at a greater risk. What can we do there? And we always try to look at things through three lenses: understanding, motivation, and access. And those three things sort of braid together to create the outcome that is ultimately just a higher risk of being highly symptomatic when they encounter this virus. Meaning greater levels of obesity, diabetes, and sedentary lifestyles, and et cetera, et cetera. And the trick from the public health perspective is always, it's the logic. It's trying to solve the puzzle. Then it's trying to change behavior. Are you okay over there?
I'm good. Right. Hey, bro, I'm telling you, I was in the store the other day and I sneezed and people looked at me like I had said something bad about their mother, man. They was like,
it's amazing.
I'm sorry. I got allergies.
You got to do it. You got to get it out.
That was back when it was 60 degrees though, and not a snowstorm coming. So
I want to touch on that briefly too, and I don't want to overtake all of this, but this is a meaningful point to me. And because then you think how to change behavior, and there's an obvious access concern. But then there's also an obvious maybe the understanding. Like if one is not being taught that this is a real thing.
Right.
We know some people who buy their groceries essentially at a gas station or a 7-Eleven or a corner shop. Okay, that's an access issue because there's not a Whole Foods in the neighborhood. Say, you know what I mean? That's what, when you hear the term food desert, that's what you're referring to. So not only is there an access concern, but there's an understanding limitation, because theoretically you could go to one of those corner stores and make healthier decisions. You'd have to understand the how and why of nutrition on a fairly nuanced level to enter a place like that. So anyway, you're just getting my wheels turning, and I don't know that we've got a solution today on this call, but I will say that the point you're making is a really resonant one.
Yeah. And what I'll add to that, Jim, is just that, that there is, as much as we can ask for the change on the side of the people, and perhaps that's where there's a little bit more ease to it. There is something that necessitates change on the system side of things too.
Without a doubt.
You understand what I'm saying?
100%.
Where these things have been designed,
Mm-hmm.
right? So when we talk about the system not working, no, the system works exactly the way that it was designed to work.
That's right.
And so we have to understand that there's got to be some dismantling and then re-putting together the system. And so, one of the things that I'll mention, I posted last night, I've been really intrigued by some of these individual Black politicians or otherwise who have come out in support of Trump. And so I began to do a little bit of research on,
I like this. We're going politics right away. Let's go.
Well, just because, and again, I don't want to jump
really
far into it, but I do want to say, okay, what are the reasons that they're giving, and then let me really look into,
sure,
like, okay, if this is the reason they're giving, then, and that's true, then let's give due credit. So one of the things has been, of course, the lowest unemployment rate amongst African Americans in history. And so I posted actually on my Facebook yesterday afternoon just this really interesting graph that shows that this spiked, Black unemployment spiked around 2007, 8, 9, and then starting around 2010, it really is on a downward trend from 2010 until right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so while absolutely it reached its lowest point under the Trump administration,
mm-hmm.
It was already on that downward trend. Now, on the flip side of that, and now of course I'm blanking on what it's called, but Trump has promoted a program in which people can get a tax break for investing in neighborhoods that were otherwise underinvested in.
Mm-hmm.
And so if something like that can produce more food opportunities,
mm-hmm.
right, in these neighborhoods that otherwise have a corner store, then I think that that's something that is worth acknowledging. I still don't like his rhetoric. I still, there's a lot of things that he says and does that I personally don't agree with, but I guess in my old age, I'm willing to, just give people a shot and try to acknowledge, like, hey, okay, here's something good, and what can I do to move that good piece forward? And so I think that's certainly worth conversation.
Okay, so, dude, you're giving me so much to think about. But I'm gonna have to just go. I'm making notes on some of the things you're saying that I want to touch on, but I've got to go with you where you're at right now. So I'm gonna weigh in there just real quick. I do my best to be non-polarizing when it comes to politics. When we do stuff like this, when we record things, because I really do believe that when it comes to the mission of the Good Athlete Project, it's separate from me. Me and my immediate crew, like, we are the ones usually boots on the ground, getting good information out, helping people, supporting people however we can. And that should be separate from politics. So I don't want to necessarily polarize and limit our opportunity to go support young people.
Right.
That said, I think hard, and I have opinions. And what I'm recognizing, and I'll do my best not to use any names or anything, what I'm recognizing is that you have found a way, like you say, in your wise old age.
Yep. 32.
You're developing the ability to essentially take emotion out of it and look at policy, which hopefully politics. I think a lot of people's problem with the current administration is that maybe that person isn't able to do that well enough. You know, to take emotions out of it, look at actually what's going on, because you say a couple of things there, and this is, my friends know exactly where I stand in the political sphere. But I'll say this: there's never been a president or administration or anything that's universally liked. But also, there's probably never been a president that's just been wrong every single time. You know, it makes 100 decisions a day and is wrong 100 times out of 100. That would be hard to believe also. And because you bring up something interesting, I would say that taking credit for a trend that started 10 years ago, you know, sort of, and reaping the benefit of it downstream, you know, and then taking credit for it, that doesn't seem too out of character. It's important for us to understand, you know, how that works sometimes.
Right.
But like what you just said, and maybe I'll ask you to like add a little more there. The bill to increase one's likelihood of investing, what, in property or in anything in underserved communities.
So I'm blanking on it. Maybe what I'll do is I'll post a link once I refine what I read, because I just read it last night. But Google search.
Sure. If someone's hearing this, I'm sure they can find it. Yeah.
Why are Black people voting for Trump? Like, why would Black, and so there's three main arguments. It is the unemployment rate. It is the First Step Act.
Is that what it's called?
The Criminal Justice Reform Act. That's the First Step Act. And then it's this other one that is increasing
tax breaks
for investing. And so
and like there. Again, I have my own political opinions, but that seems like a good and necessary bill to have passed. It seems, you know.
Well, and so on that First Step Act, there are 5,000 inmates who have gotten out of jail early because of reduced sentencing for certain drug crimes that have come out of this First Step Act. Now, what's interesting even about that is that what you'll find is that President Obama, during his presidency, began to make the jail sentences more even between powder cocaine and rock, you know, the crack rock, because it used to be right under Reagan is where it started, and it worsened under Clinton, that if you had a crack rock, you were doing 10 years for having the same amount of crack rock as you were for doing powder cocaine. And one of the things that you'll know is who's got the powder versus who's got the crack rock, right? There is a racial disparity between those two, and thus that's why you see that racial disparity in the jail system. Now, I'm sitting here, you know, having this conversation. I don't think anybody should be doing crack, you know, or cocaine, period, right? So there's the other part of me that's like, you know, I don't understand that piece of it, because I'm somebody who's been sober my entire life.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying?
You know, but you're right though. And again, you're encouraging me because you're identifying that these things are nuanced, you know. Hold on, I got to wave. If anyone has questions for Maurice, by the way, feel free to throw them out there. But what you're saying is a nuanced thing, and that's what we need. We need nuance in politics, in policy, in just the way that we move through the world. Because you're saying, I think it's clear that like the powder, I mean, that's happening on Wall Street. I'm sorry. Okay. Down at the Merc, lunchtime, we got to be on for the second half of the day. It's just the truth of the world versus crack rocks being in different sort of locations.
Right.
It's different. Why should one be punished more than the other?
Right.
Up for debate. But your stance is neither is good. but
Right.
that's like, that's the way it has to be thought through. So it's
Yeah.
encouraging for me to hear you say that.
So my point is just that a lot of the things that Trump has done for the Black community, he has taken and has really touted. And in fact, his 2020 slogan for the Black community is, "What do you have to lose?" And it's an interesting point because there's a excellent podcast called Color Coded, and talks a lot about the transition of Black people from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party. For example, Jackie Robinson was a huge Republican. Remember that the Republican Party was the party of Lincoln, this, that, and the other. Well, what happens eventually is during the 1960s, you get all of your Southern Democrats who actually leave the Democratic Party and go and join the Republican Party. So your segregationists left the Democratic Party and go and join the Republican Party. And 1960, Black people wanted to be able to come to the Republican convention, and they were like, nope, you got to go somewhere else. So by the time you get to 1964, there's never been such a mass movement. 94% of Black people in 1964 vote for LBJ. And so, but there's a movement right now called Blexit, right, which is the Black exit from the Democratic Party. Because there is at least, some people who feel like the Democratic Party assumes that Black people will vote for them. And so they do nothing to really earn that vote. The Republican Party has assumed that Black people are going to vote Democrat. And so they've done nothing to necessarily earn that vote. And so then what you end up with is a vote that is automatically given without necessarily being able to say, hey, here's specifically what has happened to help. Again, this is stuff, man, that I as a social studies teacher, this is stuff that I have always enjoyed learning and looking after. But I could talk about it for days, so we don't have to.
Well, but you bring up something so interesting, because you could talk about it for days, and there is days worth of information to talk about and to think through. So that seems important. And what is especially important to me in this moment with an election coming up is that most people who are going to vote don't have the time or even the interest to do all that talking, to do all of that thinking. Which essentially brings us to where we are, which is a headline-based political system. If you can get the headlines right, you can sway
Absolutely.
public consciousness or public opinion. So I guess let me do this. From 1960 to now, let's just use that. Like, what are like 2 or 3 bullet points that you think everyone needs to know? Is that too hard?
No. I think here's a couple of things to consider. 1964, you have LBJ, who is a Southern Texas guy who is very much so reportedly known for loving to throw the N-word around. And I think the movie Selma, does a really good job kind of connecting LBJ and MLK and kind of showing what some of their relationship could have been like. And so what I'll say is, at the end of the day, LBJ understood as a politician, as an American, that what was best for this country was that it not be torn apart into a second civil war, right? And that he actually had the mindset that working with an MLK was better than working with the Malcolm X, right? So maybe I better give MLK what he wants, because if Malcolm X is the next answer,
right,
then actually maybe MLK looks less scary than Malcolm, who says by any means necessary.
That is interesting.
Okay, so there are Democrats, white Democrats, who have done what was necessary to attempt to, some Black people would say pacify, some Black people would say answer the call. Okay.
Yeah.
I think you see Democrats having done something, right? So you can always go back to the Civil Rights Act of 64 and 65. The second thing I will say, though, is by the time you get to Clinton, Clinton passes some bills through, man, that are problematic. He everybody talks about Clinton as the saxophone playing president, the first black president, because
right.
He has some swag, he had a little girl on the side or whatever. And the problem is Clinton's crime bills and some of that 3-strike stuff ruined family households.
Yeah.
There's no doubt in my mind, right? But his story is told differently than that of Ronald Reagan, who was a lot more forward. He would come out and say things like welfare queen, right? These phrases that are incredibly, offensive. And I think that's where Trump kind of lands too, though, right? Is again, that language piece. And so Clinton also had some issues, and again, I think nobody has really looked to the system as a whole and said, hey, maybe there's an issue with the system that I can't just policy my way through.
Yeah.
So then you come to President Obama, and you get your first black president, and that was phenomenal. And I'll admit, I was a sophomore at Knox, and I said, there is not a chance that this country is electing a black man by the name of Barack Hussein Obama. There's not a chance. We're not ready for that. But I think the end of Bush's presidency, in which you see that economic downturn, right? The color green was way more important than the color black or white, right? So Obama gets in. And what I'll say about that is as much as, Joe Biden is going to try to ride on that this fall, and as much as you can look at things that President Obama did, in fact, one of the things that he did that I think was incredibly powerful is his conversation surrounding Trayvon Martin. I would just say that right now is a time for innovation. And so we can't just continue, the Democratic Party cannot just continue. And by the way, I will say I'm not a registered anything, I am an independent, because I've got some very conservative viewpoints based on my faith. And then I have some obviously what are considered, I don't know why racial equity is considered liberal, but it should just be considered right.
Right.
I think racial equity is a matter of faith. But again, I'll save that for another point. I just think that the Democratic Party cannot continue to ride that. It's time for innovation, and honestly, Trump has been innovative, not always in ways that are pleasing, but he's been innovative, and so sure. I think that's where we're at in terms of when you go to the polls in the fall. Is let's and Jim, to your point, man, that idea that not everybody has that privilege of sitting down for a moment and thinking through these things. They're working 2 jobs, or right now they're not working at all, but they're worried about, not working. So right. I do think, I guess that was my 3 bullet points that turned into a 3-paragraph essay. So
I like it. Well, I think it's that's part of the work that we try to do too, in a different way, but we try to distill bodies of research so that best practice is now accessible. And I wonder, and that seems like something that I'm always interested in. You wrote that article for Beyond Strength, which I was very grateful for. to find ways to sort of bullet point out important concepts so that hopefully people could pick them up and run with them.
Right.
That feels meaningful. I don't know, when you do that, you automatically discount some things. That's why you got to consider the source, but it's necessary, because otherwise the source is unfiltered Twitter feeds.
Right.
So that feels like, especially as the next election approaches, something really important. Do a lot of have thoughtful people like yourself do a lot of front end work to distill concepts in a way that can be picked up and utilized by the person who is working two jobs, or just plainly doesn't have the time or interest to work through these really layered concepts. So you take a layered concept and then you add the spin of however someone is throwing their layered concept into the world. What an incredibly high level of discretion it takes to figure that out and work through it. That's a lot to ask of a public. So like you say, what happens? People go into the voter booths and they see Democrat or Republican and they vote based on party, and boom. It's sort of a silly way it's kind of a silly system if you think about it. But and probably that's why we are where we are right now. Meaning only that we're at a place in time where the system needs to be reconsidered. How we elect public officials, and that's not loaded in any way. I just think we need to reconsider how we access information regarding policy, and I think I think these are important concepts that I hope someone is wrestling with. So to bring that conversation back into a point that you made earlier about sneezing in the grocery store. I can't drop this yet. It's like we're gonna back publish a lot of these Coffee with a Coach conversations as podcasts. I think people are gonna get bored of the COVID stuff, but I hope that we pull interesting concepts out of the COVID sort of dilemma or situation,
right,
so that it's accessible and interesting at any point in time. And one thing that is interesting to me about this point in time is, first of all, we won't go into how prepared or underprepared we were for this outbreak, because I'm just looking at the numbers now. Did you know that it's still like less than a third of people tested are testing positive? So you say, which is wild. To me, at least, it's wild, because here are people who are going to the hospital. They're so symptomatic at this point in time that they're going into the hospital with these symptoms that align with the symptoms that we're saying align with the virus, and most of them, the vast majority, after being tested, don't have it. I think that needs to get out into the public and be heard for some reason, just because it offers an interesting perspective. There's also this: if we stay pretty healthy and we stay on our current trend, first of all, I do think this is an amazing moment in time. Like, there are not, I don't know what it's like by you, but there are not police patrolling the streets making sure everyone's inside. We've just like gotten the word out to the world, and the world stayed in.
Right.
For the most part. So it's pretty amazing.
It's different by state. Illinois is doing a great job.
I think Illinois is doing a great job.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think, and shout out to JB Pritzker. I think he's done a pretty good job from what I can tell. But assuming we stay on current trends, this will be a less deadly virus than the flu in, I think it was winter of 2017 or 2018, when 80,000 Americans died over one winter. So I say that not to, like you said, like, I don't want to diminish, I don't want to take any weight off of this moment in time, because it's a weighty one and it's a complicated one. But I also, you mentioned isolation earlier. You got this pretty toxic combo of isolation, sedentary behavior, and fear. And we're working toward, you mentioned the ripple effect and like the downstream with the jobs. We're going to see some downstream impacts of this. If we stay in isolation long enough and don't identify those things, isolated from a community, sedentary in our behavior, and afraid, just sort of this low simmering level of stress, then we're going to see some mental health and physical health ramifications downstream. So all of that to say, I'm really excited to see whoever's making policy. It's one thing to say, shut it down, our people are come first, that's what's important. It's another thing to sort of creatively reintegrate. You know, like we have to, coaches have to coach, teachers have to teach,
Right.
preachers have to preach,
Right.
you know, someone's got to, you know, it has to happen. The question is how, at what pace, and what will the regulations look like?
Yeah. You know, so a couple things. I think I'm missing my youth group. I'm missing my church. You know, we've moved to online, and it just is not. It's not the same.
Yeah.
I think the other piece, though, the part that you said about it being a creative reintegration, really is necessary. If you know, you work in schools, you take 530 elementary school kids, half of whom wipe their nose like this.
Right.
Can you help me open this? Right, because it's at lunchtime.
Right.
And so already schools are naturally germy places.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's why you see the cold and the flu run through a school, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you think about if all of a sudden May 2nd, they say, okay, everybody back. And one kid comes to school.
Right.
Two kids come to school as carriers.
Yeah. Right.
And then they fist bump their friend.
Yeah.
It just I don't know. I know that the curve has flattened, and the fact that we're going to see less numbers than we did in that flu, it is a direct result of staying in. It's not to say, oh, see, it wasn't even that bad, and that's 100%. How some people take it and twist it. Right? Right. Well, look, these numbers aren't even. Yeah, no, that's a direct
because we did this right,
doing this
right.
But how do you get back to that? You know, Japan, for example, just had a second spike.
Yeah.
And so it'll be interesting. It's not easy work.
No.
I feel for the people who are in position to make these decisions.
Yeah.
You know, and so sincerely I'm praying for wisdom for President Trump and for Governor Pritzker and Mayor Lightfoot, who, by the way, her memes have been hilarious. All the memes of Mayor Lightfoot peeking around the corner and stuff, man, it's been tremendous. And she's just kind of bought right into it and part of it. But in fact, let me tell you this, Jim. Mayor Lightfoot is married to the sister of DeKalb High School's athletic director.
Get out of here.
So Peter Goff, who's our athletic director, prior to that was in Canelan and in Sycamore. His sister is the first lady of Chicago.
I love it.
So Peter, because that election cycle was at the same time my wife was elected to school board here, so we were checking in on one another in terms of what that election was looking like. And so, but yeah, he always brags on that.
That's pretty amazing. And I think you bring up a really important point. And I think my assumption is that the reintegration can only be as nuanced as some of these other things that we've discussed, or it has to be.
Right.
Meaning, there are some interesting concepts. Like we've got some friends down in Texas. There are some spots in Texas that, like, you go 30 miles and you don't see another person. That farmer, say, should be able to farm probably, you know what I mean?
Right.
There's a few factors that must be considered. Population density is a massive one. You know, like you mentioned, you know, population density, how close people are to one another.
Right.
You brought up little kids wiping their noses like that. You know, the likelihood of spreader, population density, likelihood of spreader, and where people are coming from. And here's where because I've been sort of, no one asked me to think through this stuff, but I have advice if Mayor Lightfoot ever is interested.
Got it.
Like high schools, I think, are going to reopen before colleges. And the reason I think that is because colleges are pulling from such a wide, you're talking about cross-contamination. You pull from 30 states, hundreds of towns, like the likelihood that when you pull from that range that somebody might be infected is much higher than if you pull from the DeKalb area, say.
Right.
So there's that component. But then you also have to consider the nature of an event. Like you would theoretically, you should theoretically be able to assume that a professional business, when its people are reminded of certain regulations, should be able to behave in a hygienic way. I'm not convinced that if Chicago hosts Lollapalooza, that you can make the same.
There's nothing hygienic about Lollapalooza.
But you know what I'm saying? And listen, I enjoyed myself very much. But you see, like, you know what I'm saying? It's not just like, we have to think more than like, well, 100 people, anything more than 100 people is too many. Well, more than 100, people in a mosh pit is one thing. 100 people
Right.
in an office building spread out between 10
Right.
floors, like these are different. They're different. It is nuanced. So I really do hope people are thinking about this. I mentioned this before, but there's a Trader Joe's not too far from me. And they have, since the very start, grocery stores have been open from the start, all the way through. They're essential. But this one Trader Joe's, they only allow a certain amount of people in. When you're waiting in line outside, you're 6 feet apart and it's marked off. Like this seems basic, easy to do, and fairly logical. And I'm not sure why, as we consider integration, why we wouldn't consider methods like that.
Right. Right. Yeah, I saw a tweet the other day that made me laugh. It said there are going to be two factors to reintegration, and number one is the density, or how dense is the population, and number two is how dense is the population. And so somebody subtweeted and said, "You said the same thing twice. What do you mean?" And the person tweeted them back and said, "You're number two."
Yeah.
So there is a necessity. And again, as somebody, listen, Jim, we had a church in our organization that had 43 members test positive with COVID-19.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So where there have been some conservative folk who have argued, this was a ploy to ruin the economy, to, try to come against Trump. Our church organization, which is a fairly conservative organization, has now come to the realization in general that no, this is the real deal. Like yeah. Look at these people. We had a top a minister who served at the state level in another state pass away, and again having some other health complications that came along with that. But he passed away from this. We had one of our national evangelists in a coma for weeks, as a result of this. And so this is real. But for the people who have not had those personal experiences or not had something connected to them and are still making some of those other arguments, I think you will run into some different struggles. But you're going to have that anyways. You're going to have that anyway. So again, if you can ask that business to be responsible for doing their part and doing what they can. Our Walmart, for example, they only let in a certain number of people into the store at a time. When you're waiting outside in the line, 6 feet apart. Yep. So in a very similar fashion, they're being responsible for that, and I just have tried not to go to Walmart at all because.
And you limit, right.
But.
Well, it's just interesting because I think, dude, it's all always a balancing act. Because right. You say, like, eventually, man, I'm going to get choked up again. But we know some people who are like, it would not take me 2 seconds to say, would I rather risk encountering this, and it's sort of on me to wash my hands and take care of myself and do all this stuff, to not lose my job? I would do it in a second.
Yeah.
And it's complicated because, like, I have two parents who would be in the prime category to be at risk here. So I am certainly not going to take this thing lightly. I haven't seen two of the people I love more than anything on earth in over a month, and that's a problem. But that's the balance that I'm weighing. I'd rather do my best to keep them safe. But there are some. But what a privilege that is. they can sort of bunker down, I can bunker down, and that's fantastic. If you ask a family in an already under-supported area of the city or the world to go through this, and with no job prospect on the back end because wherever they were working just let everybody go, and it's just complicated.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's complicated.
Well, and I was in my backyard last week at 72 degrees. I'm playing soccer with my kids. And I just paused for a moment, and it hit me how privileged I was.
Right.
To have a job that I was still getting full salary. I'm working from home. And I get it. You can make the argument, yeah, but Maurice, you went and you got your master's degree, you got your bachelor's degree, you've worked to put yourself in that position. No, I get that.
Mm-hmm.
But the amount of help I've had along the way to now be in a place where I'm still getting full salary, working at home, and spending the afternoon playing soccer with my kids.
Yeah.
That is privilege. And so, as somebody who's always promoting social justice, I understand that absolutely as a Black male in this world, I may be underprivileged in a lot of different ways. Mm-hmm. But as I stood there in my backyard, it hit me. I'm in a position of privilege right now.
Yeah.
That I know that some of my students are not in.
Right.
I know that some of the families from my church are not in. So it's tough, man. Hey, we got to talk about something happy, because I've got a 10 o'clock meeting that I've got to go jump into. But let's talk about something happy real quick before we go.
I love that, and so this is what I like about this, though. In unscripted conversations, I'm always excited to see just what pops up, and
right.
And I will tell you that this is positive. We looked over. We put out your video, correct, from the event?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah. And we if anyone is listening, watching this video on Instagram Live, any of the above, I hope they check out that video. I hope they check out the article on beyondstrength.net. Because one thing that I'm so impressed with when I talk to you is exactly, I guess it's everything that I've said, is the willingness to engage in complicated ideas and the willingness to try to unbraid them for sake of accuracy, because only then can we get on to a meaningful next step. And, a lot of, whether it's social justice, racial equity, whatever, having a conversation on race with your football team, whatever it might be, modern politics and COVID-19, it's the approach that is the sort, I think, the singular transferable idea. It's not, nothing's always right, nothing's always wrong, but a healthy approach like that seems like it at least give you a real good shot. Is that pretty accurate in the way you go about your business?
Yeah, I guess one of the things my wife and I were discussing just the other day is that if you are going to be for justice, then you have to be for justice no matter who it's for and no matter who it's against.
That's really good.
Because there are people who want to be for justice when it is fitting for them. So they want to be for justice when the cop has shot the unarmed kid, but they don't want to be for justice when, the kid has made a poor choice and maybe has tried to rob the store, and now he's getting arrested, right? So justice is in its truest sense, justice has to be against those that need it against them, and on fight on the side of whoever it needs to fight on, and we don't get to pick and choose when
justice is applied.
Justice should be applied.
You have no idea how meaningful that quote is. That line of thinking is to me. Ralph Waldo Emerson, Self-Reliance. You heard?
I've heard of it, have not read it.
I might have to send you this book. I literally have a stack of them because I give them away. They're just meaningful. I was hoping that I would have the quote underlined. I don't, and I could just pull it quickly. But there's a quote that is something to the extent of what is like most noble in the world is honesty and truth. That's always step one. Find that. And
Right.
then justice, and it defines justice immediately after. Justice is the application of that truth to the world. And I was like, wow, that's powerful, because it's like you say, it's not a pick and choose thing. It's not a when it's convenient thing. It's
right.
We have to do our best to be honest and lean into truth, and then finding the way to appropriately apply that truth to the world. That's justice. So I don't know if that's the positive note that we initially decided that we wanted to end on, but
well, let's do this. I want to shout out to Knox football.
Okay, and I got Knox baseball on, but I'm with you, Knox football.
And it's because it's D3 week.
Oh yeah.
It is D3 week, and so I want to celebrate Division III athletics. What a difference it made in my life. Mm-hmm. I want to give in particular a shout out to Coach Andy Gibbons. If you check on in the Twitterverse in the Knox world. They're doing a lot of shout outs to Andy Gibbons, who is now was the head football coach when you and I were there, but is now operating as the director of the fitness center and strength and conditioning coach for all the programs, and is doing a great job in that role.
Yeah.
And so shout out to Coach Gibbons.
Can I double down on that shout out?
Yeah.
Andy Gibbons. Good man. One of the definitely one of the more meaningful people in mentors in my development. I'm glad that we both were able to have him as a head football coach. Have you been down there since he's taken over this new role?
Yes, yeah, I've been down there on a couple occasions, and it's so neat to watch him work with. The videos I watched yesterday were the volleyball girls, mm-hmm. and they were just like, Coach Gibbons, you're getting me stronger. You sent me workouts to work here, and I've always known that you've cared about me more than just as an athlete. You ask how classes are going and how I'm doing. And I think that speaks to him perfectly. He's definitely interested, not just, hey, how's football going?
Mm-hmm.
It was Maurice, how are things? And so I just appreciate it so much.
I love it. And I know he appreciates you. I sent him some stuff. Whenever you give him a shout out and something that we've done together, I'll shoot it over to him, and I know he's grateful to have you in his life as well. So I'm going to reach out to him again today. You've inspired me to do that. But all right, so here's the positive news. This is a good conversation with a good person, and it's a good way to start today. So that on its own is pretty positive.
Absolutely.
All right, man. Well, I hate to keep you. I hope we can do this again soon, whether we record it or not. Let's talk about life.
Absolutely.
Etc.
Okay, sounds good. I appreciate you inviting me on, and I look forward to maybe being able to come back up to the city and hang with you guys a little bit, man. And
last time we did this, we had tacos in hand.
Right.
I prefer it that way. So
right, exactly. I'm missing the tacos, man.
All right, we got to, as soon as this thing is lifted, we're going to make